Let us have a look at this particular book, Pascal's Wager, or Pascal's Wager, a study of practical reasoning in philosophical theology, because we came across a short video which stated that he used mathematical formula, etc. to prove the existence of God. He had some sort of vision and it was revealed to him, supposedly. So let's have a look at this book by Nicholas Reschke. Contents page. Continued. And there's a preface here which reads, "This little book is emphatically not an exercise of Pascal scholarship or exegesis. Its main task is the philosophical scrutiny of the line of thought that he pursued. The historical description of Pascal's particular dealings with the relevant ideas is subordinated to this end. The book is thus concerned primarily with these issues of philosophical theology themselves, rather than with their role in the concrete historical setting of Pascal's own thought and writing. The idea of the book arose in this particular author's mind in the spring of 1981. He was then writing Risk, Washington DC, University Press of America, 1983, and was led to reflect on Pascal's Wager or wager argument in this connection, but the project itself had to be squeezed into the interstices of other work. It was drafted in Oxford during the summer of 1981, reworked there during the summer of 1982, and polished during the summer of 1983. It was generally a side show, the product of vacation times in that home of lost causes. This book has 4 chapters. The first examines the details of Pascal's Wager or wager argument. The second deals generally and abstractly with the epistemological issues posed by the pragmatic route to the validation of beliefs. The third proceeds in the spirit of Pascal to look at some arguments of philosophical theology from the vantage point afforded by modern decision theory. Finally, the concluding chapter considers whether this sort of practicalistic, interest-oriented argument has any useful place at all in theological deliberations. The overall aim of the discussion within the book is to show that Pascal's notorious Wager or wager argument was a vehicle of a fruitful and valuable insight, one which not only represents a milestone in the development of an historically important tradition of thought, but can still be seen as making an instructive contribution to philosophical theology. Pascal's thoughts, penses, of which the wager or Wager argument passage is a minute part, is a collection of jottings that was unpublished in his own day. It was originally published by its Port Royal editors only 8 years after Pascal's death in 1670. Although a summary of the argument had already been presented at the end of the Port Royal Logic, 1662. Many modern versions are available. The indefatigable Pascal scholar Louis Lafuma alone produced 5 editions. 4 were based on the order of Pascal's collected material, as his literary executors had them copied in duplicate. For preservation and later editing, the copy, Lafuma also issued a rationalized version of the text in which all the fragments are classified either under one of Pascal's own topical headings or in various appendices. Paris, Dalmas, 1952. It is in this numerical ordering that the penses are cited here, cross-referenced to the older authoritative edition of Leon Brunswick's Paris, Hachette, 1914. An English translation of the penses by John Warrington, based on Lafuma's Dalmas edition, is included in the Everyman's Library series and so forth. They go on about that. And that's Oxford Summer 1983 by this particular author. Pascal's turning. Background of the Wager or wager argument. Pascal's thoughts, pensives, is a large assemblage of brief notes and drafts that he jotted down during the years 1652 to 62 in preparation for writing a projected apology for the Christian religion. The passage, which concerns us in the minuscule part of this whole, it consists of 2 leaves covered on both sides by handwriting overlapping in several directions, full of erasures and emendations. This brief text endeavours to present a new line of thought in support of Christian religious faith. Pascal himself was deeply persuaded of the importance and novelty of these deliberations. Towards the end of the text, which takes the form of a dialogue between him and an unbelieving friend, his interlocutor exclaims, "Oh, your discourse delights me, carries me away." However, to judge by the tenor of the large literature to which the small passage has given rise, Pascal's imaginary friend is very much in the minority in this regard. Pascal's wager, or wager, argument can hardly be said to have set the world on fire from its inception to the present day, when philosophers and theologians deign to mention it at all. They avoid mentioning it, or they refrain. They tend to do so by way of scornful dismissal if they ever speak of it. It is no exaggeration to say with one 19th century student of Pascal that the argument has been a scandal even to some of his greatest admirers. Theologians have treated it with lofty disdain, and philosophers feel it somehow as a professional obligation not to accept his cogency. And yet, as this brief book will try to show, the charges of moral insensitivity and other such high-minded complaints often launched against the argument are based on a total misunderstanding of its aim and import or importance, and reflects a callous refusal to accept the argument on its own terms. Only by failing to recognise the job that Pascal's argument is designed to accomplish, by seeing it as attempting a task altogether different from its actual probative aim, can one support the facile recriminations all too often thrown its way. And this is hardly reasonable. Surely any argument can be made to look silly if reconstrued to aim at conclusions never even remotely intended for it. In actual fact, Pascal's wager argument contains the core of a deeply insightful innovation. Its groundbreaking idea of a theological use of practical reason marks an important departure which, in the hands of such subsequent masters as Immanuel Kant and William James, has come to make a substantial impact on the philosophy of religion. The wager argument passage opens with the following prologue: Infinity nothing. Our soul has been cast into the body, where it finds number, time, dimension. Thereupon it reasons and causes nature or necessity, and can believe nothing else. Yet unity added to infinity adds nothing to it any more than 1 foot added to an infinite length, or an finite length. The finite is annihilated in presence of the infinite and becomes pure nothingness. Even then does our intellect stand to God. Pensives 343- or over 233. Might take a bit to get your head around that. The close connection with Descartes' fourth meditation is striking. I am a kind of intermediate between God and nothingness, between the Supreme Being and non-being, non-ends. My nature is such that insofar as I am a creature of the Supreme Being, I have nothing in me to deceive me or lead me astray. Yet insofar as I participate somehow in nothingness, non-being that is, insofar as I am not myself the Supreme Being and am lacking in no end of things, it is not surprising that I am deceived. You may have a bit of a problem trying to get your head around it. To be sure, Pascal himself will hear nothing of intermediation in relation to God. Man stands squarely on the side of nothingness. But the similarities outweigh the differences. Descartes and Pascal alike see man's inadequacy as paramount. Both stress man's utter dependency on God for whatever goods he may enjoy, cognitive goods prominently included. The matter of justification in the fact of sceptical doubts is part of the common problem heritage of these thinkers, and the starting point of Pascal's wager is clearly Descartes. Its drama is played out on the stage of Cartesian skepticism. Moreover, the strategy of Pascal's wager argument in philosophical theology can fruitfully be viewed against the background of the Cartesian revolution in philosophy. Descartes put man as knowing at the centre of the stage, instead of addressing questions regarding the nature of reality directly. The issue of our knowledge became the pivot point, beginning with the question, how do I really know? Descartes assigned to God the pivotal role of guarantor of our knowledge of the world, and he maintained that man can come to know about the existence and nature of God through the light of God-given reason alone. God, our Maker, has implanted an idea of himself in our minds, somewhat as a silversmith impresses his hallmark into his product. This idea provides the basis on resources can come to knowledge of God's nature and existence through the clear and distinct intuitions of our mind, in much the same way that we come to know the truths of mathematics and metaphysics. As far as the mechanism of our knowledge is concerned, the necessity of God is, for Descartes, on the same cognitive plane as the necessity of the Pythagorean theorem or that of the non-vacuity of spaces. Pascal retained Descartes' skeptically inspired preoccupation with the processes and products of the human intellect, but he abandoned Descartes' reliance on cognitive operations of human reason, and thus his orientation toward demonstrative knowledge. The metaphysical proofs of God are so remote from human reasoning and so complicated that they make little impression. If some find them profitable, it is only at the moment when they grasp them. An hour later they fear they have been mistaken. In place of Descartes' Thomistic, scholastic concern for demonstrating the existence of God, Pascal substitutes an Augustinian concern for the validation of belief in a God who is beyond the reach of the unaided human intellect and outside the grasp of feeble human reason. Indeed, knowledge as such would not really serve our needs in this domain. There is a great difference between the knowledge and the love of God. God lies beyond the reach of our ordinary cognitive resources. If there is a God, he is infinitely incomprehensible, since having neither parts nor limits, he has no affinity to us. We are incapable of knowing either what he is or if he is. God is Deus absconditus, Deu cache, a hidden God, or cache. As Pascal sees it, reasoning can only impel the outsider into the fold of believers by a circuitous route. What we can establish by reasoning is not the direct conclusion that there is a God, but only the oblique result that belief in a God is warranted. The task is not to deploy the processes of the skeptics. The task is not to deploy the process of the skeptics have established, but to show uncommitted indifferentists that belief in God is rationally legitimate. Pascal held with the Renaissance skeptics that our human resources for securing knowledge by inquiring reasons are wholly inadequate to the demands of apologetics. For Pascal, the pivotal question is thus no longer how can one demonstrate that a God of such and such a character exists, but rather how can one validate having faith in such a God. He writes, "It is a remarkable fact that none of the canonical writers ever employed nature to prove God. They all endeavour to instill belief in him. David, Solomon, and the rest never said, 'There is no void, therefore there is a God.' They must have had more knowledge than the most learned men who came after them, all of whom use such an argument. This is highly significant." Pences, 19/243. Pascal shifts the issue from the demonstration of facts to the justification of faith, and he presses his question in the face of a profound skepticism regarding the capacity of reason in the theological sphere, one deeper than that of Descartes. Pascal returns to faith rather than theoretical reason, precisely because of substantial doubts regarding the capabilities of the latter. I think he might be talking about Descartes. The pivotal issue with respect to belief is not one of rational feasibility alone. Desirability also enters in. Would we really rest content with a God whose existence is a matter of demonstration? Is the God who emerges at the end of a syllogism or some yet more complete course of demonstration the sort of God we need or want? Pascal thinks not. He anticipates Kierkegaard's view that insufficiency in point of proof and evidence is advantageous, indeed even necessary to a viable faith. Accordingly, a transposition is at issue here that might be called Pascal's shift in theological argumentation, a shift away from theoretical arguments that purport to argue probatively for the existence of God in the manner of Aquinas' 5 ways to a different style of practical argumentation, geared not to a theoretical demonstration of the existence of God as an ontological fact, but to a practical resolution regarding what we ought to believe. The salient features of the argument is thus its recourse to praxis and to prudence. And it goes on. Pascal's shift away from the rational convictions secured by demonstrative reason has important consequences. To accept something, to believe in something, and to place one's trust in something can all be seen as actions of a certain sort, things that one can decide on and do, or else decide against and refrain from. Accordingly, the level of the discussion is shifted from establishing a fact to justifying an action. Such a shift from the cognitive for theoretical to the practical use of human reasoning puts the discussion on an entirely different basis. It puts the practical issue of deciding what we should do at the forefront. The basic issue now is not does God exist as such, but should we accept that he exists? Is it appropriate to endorse this proposition? The skeptic is right in maintaining that theorizing reason leaves the issue undecided. Nevertheless, in practical matters, indecision yields an inactivity tantamount to negation. To suspend judgment is, in its practical effect, to resolve the issue in the negative. And so Pascal insists we cannot afford the comfort of suspended judgment. A bet must be laid. There is no option. You have joined the game. 2. The wager argument, or the wager argument. Let us examine Pascal's wager or wager argument. For convenience in analysing its line of thought, his continuous discussion can be divided into 6 component sectors. 1. Who then can blame the Christians, or blame Christians for not being able to give a logical reason to their belief, or for their belief, professing as they do a religion which they cannot explain by reason? They declare, when expounding it to the world, or preaching it to the world, or revealing it to the world, that it is a foolishness, stultia, and then you complain that they do not prove it. If they proved it, they would give the lie to their own words. It isn't lacking proofs that they do not lack sense. 2. Let us examine this point and declare either God exists or he does not. To which view shall we incline? Reason cannot decide for us one way or the other. We are separated by an infinite gulf. At the extremity of the infinite distance, a game is in progress, where either heads or tails may turn up. What will you wager? According to reason, you cannot bet either way. According to reason, you can defend neither proposition. Both are wrong. The right thing is not to wager at all. Yes, but have a bet. Yes, but a bet must be laid. There is no option. You have joined the game. 3. Which will you choose, then? Since a choice has to be made, let us see. Your reason suffers no more violence in choosing one rather than the other, since you must of necessity make a choice. That is one point cleared up. But what about your happiness? Let us weigh the gain and the loss involved in wagering that God exists. Let us estimate these two possibilities. If you win, you win all. If you lose nothing. Vaga, or wager then without hesitation that he does exist. 4. That is all very fine. Yes, I must wager, but maybe I am wagering too much. Let us see. When there is an equal risk of winning and of losing, if you had only 2 lives to win, you might still wager, but if there were 3 lives to win, you would still have to play, since you are under the necessity of playing. And being thus obliged to play, you would be imprudent not to risk your life to win 3 in a game, when there is an equal chance of winning and of losing. But there is an eternity of life and happiness. That being so, if there were an infinity of chances, of which only one was in your favour, you would still do right to stake 1 to win 2, and you would act unwisely in refusing to play 1 life against 3 in a game where you had only 1 chance out of an infinite number. If there were an infinity of an infinitely happy life to win, but here there is an infinity of infinitely happy life to win. 1 chance of winning against a finite number of chances of losing. And what you stake is finite. That removes all doubt as to choice, whether the infinite is to be won, and there is not an infinity of chances of loss against the chance of winning. There are 2 ways about it. You must risk all. 5. Now there is no use alleging. Just check that. Alleging the uncertainty of winning and the certainty of risk, or to say that the infinite distance between the certainty of what one risks and the uncertainty of what one will win equals that between the finite good, which one certainly risks, and the infinite, which is uncertain. This is not so. Every player risks a certainty to win an uncertainty, and yet he risks a finite certainty to win a finite uncertainty, without offending reason. For the uncertainty of winning is proportionate to the certainty of what is risked, according to the proportions of the chance of gain and loss. Hence, if there are as many chances on one side as on the other, the right course is to play even, and then the certainty of the risk is equal to the uncertainty of the gain, so far are they from being infinitely distant. Thus our proposition is of infinite force when there is the infinite at stake in a game where there are equal chances of winning and losing. But the infinite to be won, this is conclusive, and if men are capable of truth at all, there it is. It's kind of confusing, yeah. It might be a little hard there to get your head around that. You might have to listen to the video again and again to get that, perhaps. 6. But I am so made that I cannot believe. What then do you wish me to do? That is true, but understand at least that your inability to believe is the result of your passions. For although reason now inclines you to believe, you cannot do so. Try therefore to convince yourself, not by piling up proofs of God, but by subduing your passions. You desire to attain faith, but you do not know the way. You would like to cure yourself of unbelief, and you ask for remedies. Learn from those who were once bound and gagged, like you, and who now stake all they possess. They are men who know the road that you desire to follow, and who have been cured of a sickness of which you desire to be cured. Follow the way by which they set out, acting as if they already believed, taking holy water, having masses said. Even this will naturally cause you to believe and blunt your cleverness. But that is what I fear. Why? What have you got to lose? Let us trace the flow of the argument point by point. It runs roughly as follows. 1. There is a strong streak of skepticism in Pascal, but not of irrationalism. Pascal is not concerned to downgrade reason per se, nor even to deny it a role in theology. Nor did he espouse the heresy of fideism and maintain that proofs for the existence of God have no place whatsoever in the theological scheme of things. But one can only reason effectively from conceded premises, and in this apologetic context we can expect no substantial concessions. Theological reasoning is thus inadequate to the needs of apologetics. It cannot reach those who move on a purely mundane level. From the apologetic point of view, those purviews de Dieu metaphysiques, Pascal tells us in section 381/543 of the Pensées, are simply useless. They are too complicated and too remote from the way people ordinarily reason. Pascal does not disdain or dislike theoretical reason. He is not a mythologist. How could so fine a mathematician and scientist be so? He simply thinks that there are important tasks that theoretical reason cannot accomplish satisfactorily. That of demonstrating the fundamentals of the Christian religion to skeptical non-believers among them. He does not want us to abandon theoretical reason, but simply to recognize that it has limits. Reason itself requires this recognition of us. The highest achievement of reason is to recognize that there is an infinity of things beyond its grasp. Pensées 373/267. 2. The question of inaugurating belief in God should then be approached from a different angle, not that of constraining conviction, but of motivating a decision. While theoretical probative reason fails to us in this apologetic context, practical reason can achieve a great deal. Skepticism thus accomplishes something positive and useful in clearing the way for the crucial shift from theoretical to practical reason. The issue is to be seen as one of choice under uncertainty, of a gamble with regard to belief or non-belief. We return to the pragmatic justification of belief, mooted by the praxis-oriented thinkers of the Middle Academy. Even as the exigencies of action force physicians and engineers to judgments going beyond the limits of a firm theoretical footing, so with other pressing issues in life we must resolve our questions in ways that outrun the resources of abstract cognition. And it goes on. And it says here, we cannot assume indifference. To be indifferent is effectively to come down on one side. Suspension of belief is tantamount to disbelief. 3. In the choice between accepting and rejecting God, reason as such is unavailing. Reason cannot make you choose either. Reason cannot prove either wrong. Since the question does not admit of effective resolution in the province of evidential reason, we are entitled to resolve it in the province of interest. And here Pascal has it that a clear advantage lies within belief. This line of deliberation is helpfully approached by considering a dominance argument. The options stand roughly as follows. Returns to the chooser. Okay, if you have options, if God exists or if God doesn't exist, bet on God, cost is B, plus something, maybe that's infinite, and if God doesn't exist is 0. Bet against God, cost 0, little or nothing, perhaps even something negative, and if God doesn't exist it equals 0. Betting on God clearly affords the better options here. Betting on God clearly affords the better option here. For comparison of the two columns shows that it dominates over its rival and that its returns are in some cases better and in none worse than those of the alternative. If the choice stood on this basis, its resolution would be very straightforward. If you win all. If you lose nothing. Si vous gagnez, tout, and goes off. It looks like it's French there. But this argument as it stands has its serious flaw. It fails to take account of the cost, B, of betting on God, the price we pay for ordering our lives on religious principles, saying all those prayers, performing all those good works, etc., and hearing, accepting that God exists and acting as He commands. The libertine realizes that he pays a price in giving up his self-indulgent ways. I may perhaps wager too much, or bet too much, right? It's too much, or put too much at stake. But how much is too much? Consider an arbitrary gamble that follows lines. And it's got here options. If outcome is favourable, probability P. If outcome is unfavourable, probability 1-P, etc. The expected value of these two alternatives stands as follows. It gives examples. It goes further on. It says here, the worry about wagering too much is crucial to the development of Pascal's line of argumentation, for it means that straightforward dominance considerations will not suffice and recourse to expectations is necessary. The Wager or wager argument thus unfolds in two stages, the second of which removes a limitation or oversimplification of its predecessor. The first step is a dominance argument. The second, by taking account of costs, shifts the issues from one of straightforward dominance to one of preponderant expectations. At this stage, Pascal's argument is effectively complete. Its job is done. The succeeding part of the discussion simply tries to show that this line of reasoning does indeed conform to the standard principles of probabilistic decision. Under conditions of uncertainty, the wager is simply an instance of the general strategy of probabilistic decision. 4. The next phase of deliberation proceeds in terms of the model of a lottery. However, it emphasizes a sequence of cases and not just one in each case. Stake your life as the price of entry, the price of a ticket, and stand to win additional lives. The case runs as follows. Case 1. Win. Gain 1 extra life. Have 2 lives. Maybe it's talking about the lottery, right? Specifically. Lose. Lose your life. Have 0 lives. If there are 2 tickets, equal risk case, the expected value stands as follows. EV equals 1/2 2 plus 1/2 0 equals 1. Since the expected return just equals the entry fee, you might still play or you might not. Case 2. Win. gain 2 extra lives, have 3 lives. It goes into that quite a bit. Again, that could be quite confusing unless you're probably math. You're very good at math. Or these formulas, working out these formulas. Since the expectation exceeds the entry fee, you would be imprudent not to accept this gamble. But consider now the case of an infinitely great return. Case 3. Win. Gain eternal life in heaven. Have infinitely many lives. It's got the eternity symbol here, like a sideways 8. Lose. If you lose, you lose your life. Have 0 lives. As long as there is a finite number, n, of tickets, a finite number of chances of loss, the expected value stands as follows. And it gives a formula here. Provided there is some finite chance of winning, however small, the expected return infinitely exceeds the entry fee, and the gamble should be run. What is thus contemplated is a lottery of the following sort, with the returns indicated in life units. Yeah, it gives examples here. In the probability, bet on God and the eternal life or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Critics of Pascal are often misled by that supposition of equal chances of winning and losing in paragraph 5. They rightly protest against any clearly fanciful use of the principles of indifference to arrive at 1/2 as representing the chances of God's existence. But this objection is entirely misdirected against Pascal. His reliance on the 50-50 case is only illustrative and methodological. It plays no substantive role whatsoever in the actual argument. Nowhere does Pascal say that the probability of God's existence is 1/2, and nothing in his argumentation requires it. All that matters for his reasoning is that this probability be non-zero. As long as there is a finite chance of God's existence, no matter how small, the expectation of the bet and believe alternative outweighs that of its rival. The silent fact then is that Pascal's discussion at this 4th stage is simply concerned to make the point that, and it goes through figure 1 here, the structure of choice in Pascal's wager argument, that God exists and put a finite amount be at stake. That's what he's saying. Wager that God does not exist at cost 0, and how much you'll benefit from it, or how much you'll lose. Okay, it goes into even deeper claims, argument. Continues. One recent critic writes, a fault of Pascal's argument is this. Pascal assumes that all men would evaluate in the same way as he the various outcomes, but in fact, rightly or wrongly, men will put very different values from each other on the different outcomes. Life in the Christian heaven appeals to some more than others, and the life of worldly bliss enjoyed by the non-believer also appeals to some more than others. 2 points must be made in reply. Pascal makes no assumption whatsoever about how all men would evaluate outcomes. His argument is simply addressed to those who do actually have a certain evaluative stance. The person who, like Milton Satan, does not find the prospect of eternal life in a Christian heaven appealing is obviously not going to be motivated by Pascal's wager or vaga. But there is nothing in this that need trouble Pascal. 2. Agreement on the exact size of values is wholly unnecessary to the argument. All that matters is the rough and ready consideration that the magnitude of the value of the heavenly alternative is incomparably greater than that of the mundane, sometimes effectively infinite by comparison. Moreover, Pascal insists that one must also reckon with the consideration that once faith is secured, then ex post facto, the value of the sacrifice we make for the religious life, at cost B, comes to be reduced or annihilated. Those worldly pleasures then come to be seen as hollow and devoid of real value. Y, or you, will come to recognize your stake to have been laid for something certain and infinite, which has cost you nothing. And it goes on about certain of the salient features of Pascal's argumentation accordingly deserve re-emphasis, and so forth. Goes into these arguments here. The argument only maintains that it is prudent, rationally advantageous to accept, believe, have faith that God exists. It is prudential and not, strictly speaking, evidential. Geared to interest rather than knowledge, it proceeds ad hominem and not ad rem, being directed at us, at what we would do well to accept, and not at objective reality, at the objective nature of things. As an instrument of apologetics, the wager argument is aimed at motivating belief rather than at demonstrating its validity, at inaugurating faith where it is lacking rather than consolidating it where it exists. It thus approaches the issue of faith in God from a practical point of view. It poses the issue of religious faith as a decision about the affairs of life, like the choice of a career, the purchase of a house, or the choice of an investment for one's savings. The matter becomes a question of decision regarding the prudent management of one's affairs. Of course, little that is wholly new can be found under the philosophical sun. Striking anticipations of Pascal are found in various places. One in the book De l'Immortalité, etc., by his older contemporary Pierre de Silhorn, around 1600 to 1660. He held that since both God exists and God does not exist, are unlike and demonstrable from the resources of cognizing reason, one should choose the religious alternative because the failure to do so invokes a personal risk. Unlike in rival course, here as elsewhere, we cannot manage affairs on the basis of demonstration, physiques, but should govern assent on the basis of demonstrations in morale. Yes, Pascal's line is much the same. Pascal prudently exploits this underlying idea of risk. The core idea of Pascal's wager is to handle the question of betting on God, of faith in God and in the great promise of the Christian religion, by the same means and in the same way we used to handle risk situations in gambling, for example, a lottery, or in commercial transactions, example, insurance. The issue is treated as just another case of potential gain or loss under conditions of uncertainty. The argument thus brings to bear the standard machinery of practical reasoning used in decision theory, the theory of rational choice in economics, and their congeners. No doubt the question is more momentous than most others in life's affairs, but it is nevertheless to be regarded as different from these others, not in kind but in degree. Pascal was convinced that for persons of a certain orientation, at any rate, an effective argument for religious faith can be developed along strictly practicalistic lines. His argument accordingly portrays belief in God as part and parcel of a prudential concern for the effective pursuit of appropriate ends. Pascal's argument must be regarded in the first instance not as the demonstration of a thesis, a theoretical argument, but as legitimating a practice, a practical argument, only obliquely and derivatively. is it thesis validating by justifying the acceptance of those theses that represent the precondition of the viability of the appropriate practice at issue? What is at issue is the pragmatic validation of a praxis in terms of its potential benefits. He goes on about that. As Pascal sees it, you either act with complete indifference to God, or you can act in such a way that you will, in due course, believe in his existence and his edicts, his commands, his laws, etc. There is no can't to Pascal. He accepts as a piece of human nature that belief is catching. If you go along with pious people, you will become a believer. Pascal is speaking to a man unsure whether to follow this path or whether to be indifferent to the morality of the church. The two possible acts are not believe in God and do not believe. One cannot decide to believe in God. One can decide to act so that one will very probably come to believe in God. Pascal calls that the wager, or the wager that God is, to wager that he is not, to stop bothering about such things. Pascal calls that the wager that God is, to wager that he is not, is to stop bothering about such things. On Hacking's analysis, the argumentation involves two steps. One, the pragmatic legitimation of the practice of religious observance, and two, our counting on this practice to engender belief as a casual product. It goes into the French and is seen as an underlying idea. It's very hard to understand, perhaps, get your head around. Okay, limitations of the Varga argument. Goes on about that. Finally, the argument is addressed not to those who incline to rival theologies, or secular religions probably, theologies, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, etc., that have very different ideas about the rewards of belief, but to the ordinary, indifferent, non-caring Christian in name only, if that. It is only in a position to reach someone who conceives of God in a particular way, and it is not addressed to those who have non-standard ideas about the nature of God. The Varga argument, or wager argument, like any other, rests on particular premises, or premises. In its case, certain suppositions about the nature of God and his possibility. And it lies in the very nature of things that no argument, however cogent, can exert rational constraint on those who do not accept its premises. This is simply a fact of life, and no wise a defect or limitation of the Varga argument. So in no way is it a defect or limitation by it. Since the days of Lucretius, the following sort of reasoning has been advanced by anti-theists. Disbelief is actually beneficial for rejection of God and supernatural beings in general. Squarely puts the respondent with the responsibility for our human concerns on us humans, facing us to come to grips with our problems. We have here an interesting inversion of Pascal's line of thought, a theological argument from interest, to be sure, but on the side of disbelief rather than belief in principle. This sort of table turning is fair enough, but this particular argument turns out to be specious against Christianity at any rate. For the Christian God neither meddles in human affairs in the manner of the Greek gods of Mount Olympus, nor manages them altogether in the manner of the fate decreed by an Oriental style God, potenate. He neither creates our problems nor relieves us of the task of grappling with them. Of course, where the God at issue is conceived of in a way substantially different from that of standard Christianity, the Varga argument or wager argument can make no impact. Okay, it goes on about the Varga argument as an instrument of apologetics. Table 1. Roots at the legitimation of faith. It goes into that. Cognitive, etc., etc. Experience. It has here the wider implications of Pascal's shift can be brought only by contrasting two questions. 1. Does God exist? 2. Is it X, prudent or high-minded or foolish, etc., to believe that God exists? Clearly. Number 2 brings very different issues upon the scene, not only God alone, but also the basis of belief and the nature of X, prudence or foolishness or whatever. Pascal's discussion is predicated on the conviction that one as such is effectively attractable in the context of apologetics, and so shifts the discussion to 2, subject to the particular construction that the exact issue is a matter of prudence and so forth. The import of the Varga argument, the probabilistic turn, goes into that, and then there's a reference to John Locke. John Locke's reasoning goes badly awry. Locke argues in Pascal reminiscent style that a life of virtue rather than religiosity is preferable under a bare possibility of an afterlife.